Hello everyone and welcome to Tanchaz Talk, the world's only English language program focusing primarily on Hungarian folk music. I am your host as usual, Kalman Magyar Öcsi, coming to you from Toronto, Ontario, Canada today. Welcome whether you're listening on YouTube or through the website tanchaz.com. That's TANCHAZ.com. Today we have a very special episode which is devoted to the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival. We also have some mini interviews that we'll be hearing from a few people today. It's an episode that's dedicated for the festival, which this year, for the first time ever, has been canceled in terms of being in person, but the organizers have put together a wonderful virtual festival, and I'm very happy to dedicate this episode to them and offer it as part of the virtual festival. This is a great festival. It's been going on since 1979, the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival, and I've personally been lucky enough to visit many cities or various Western cities, which otherwise I would not have had an opportunity to see, including Calgary, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Vancouver, Victoria, Regina, and yes, Lethbridge as well. And there are only two people that I know of who have been to every festival since the first one, and we have one of them to talk to today, Louise Kadar. I actually interviewed her a couple of days ago, and I recorded our interview, and I'm going to be showing playing some of our interview with my interview with Louise. And the other person is Sue Biro from Edmonton. But Louise Kadar is from Victoria. Her background is actually Scottish and English, not Hungarian at all. Her maiden name is Jackson, go figure. But she married a Hungarian, Iggy Kadar, who most people know at this point in the Canadian folk dance community. Louise started dancing in 1979. Just before the very first festival, and she started dancing through the encouragement of her mother-in-law, Iggy's mom, Emma Kadar. And Louise and Iggy have been performing with and dancing with and leading the Victoria Buzavirag group for a long time. They've been leaders since the 1980s, and they continue to perform today. So I spoke with Louise a few days ago and asked her to share her thoughts and her memories about the formation of the festival and her memories of the very beginnings of the festival. And here's a clip from that interview. Louise, the first festival was in 1979, is that right?
That's correct, 1979, and there were only 4 groups involved in it at that point.
Where was it held?
It was held at the Magyar Jr in Vancouver.
Okay.
Everything took place in their little hall.
Were you there?
I was actually there. I was there.
Now you've been...
I've been to every one of them.
You've been to every one of them. That's fantastic. The Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival, we'll call it WCHFF. It was it formed particularly for this first festival in 1979?
Well, as I wasn't part of the actual formation of this, I'm going by what I've heard from my mother-in-law, who was involved with the organizing committee. And the concept behind this actually came from 2 men, Dr. Imre Chappell from Vancouver and Louis Lagler from Edmonton. And they got together, and I guess they started talking about their individual clubs and their dance groups. And they had heard about Pontozovac East. Mm-hmm. So they were thinking, why couldn't the Western provinces do something like that? So at that point, they got a hold of the presidents from the groups that they were in contact with, there were only 4 of them. It was Victoria, Vancouver, Edmonton, and Calgary. So they got a hold of those presidents and formed this whole idea. And because they wanted to have it over a little bit longer than just a 2-day weekend. They chose the Thanksgiving weekend because people had finished their summer holidays and they were getting back into the swing of things. So it became customary to hold it over the Thanksgiving holiday weekend. All 3 days, yeah. So after the first festival, which was a simple success, it was definitely a success, but it was relatively simple. It went on, and the next year, Edmonton agreed to host it, and it got much bigger at that point. Edmonton's president had gotten in touch with other dance groups and presidents and got them brought into it, and it's just blossomed from that point.
Was there always a kind of it was focused around the performance, the gala performance, correct?
Yes, it was focusing on folk dance. It used to be called the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Dance Festival, and it wasn't until many years later that we dropped the word dance from the actual title of it. But yeah, it was focused on dance, and it was organized at that point by mostly, I would say, 56ers, people that had come out in 56, and their idea of traditional Hungarian folk dancing was slightly skewed. And so you can imagine the sort of material that was presented on stage back then.
Sure.
And they found it very important to have a banquet with fancy dress and bands. Not folk bands, but dance bands. You might even classify them as Schlager bands.
Right. So like a ball. This was like a ball.
Like a ball, exactly. And yeah, I remember having to get all dressed up in a long dress and get my hair done, and wow.
Louise, I remember the first one I went to was 1995, and in Calgary, and that banquet dance was still going on Saturday night. Yeah.
Yes, actually, I think the banquet carried on right until I think 2000, even though the dancers rejected the idea. The administrators of that day still insisted on holding it, but it may possibly be that 2000 was the last actual banquet. At least that's all I remember is up to 2000.
Well, there we had some background given by Louise Kadar from Victoria about the festival. We're going to be hearing more from her as well. But speaking of bands and music, I'm going to be playing some music from some of the more notable bands that have been at the festival over the years in terms of the folk bands. And Teiko, the band Teiko, was at the festival in 1998 and as well in 2002. And let's hear some Kalotaszegi Csingerálás from the great band Teiko, as they were back then, when the lead violinist at that time was Vizeli Balázs, and this is one of my favorite Kalotaszegi recordings. Hold on, it's firing up here. Of course, we can't forget we're going to be talking about the various bands and mentioning them throughout the show. Another band that was at the festival one time from Hungary, their name is Rokonca. And if you listen to my interview with Lajos Miklós Lecsó, he talks about Rokonca and how important their presence was for him personally at this festival. Fajkusz Attila was the lead violinist, and of course Horváth Attila, the very noted music teacher and contra player. Listen to this. C-moll. I remember when this album was coming out, Havasreti Palchi, the bass and cello player for Takeoff, and he's playing on the CD as well. He said, "Öcsi, you're not going to believe this. This is a great CD. You know, there's no reverb, no echo in the studio. It's a dry recording, which is bands do it now, but now that back then that was kind of a unique approach." And that's why it sounds so guttural and so like you're right in the instrument. Ends in minor there. Nice. I also talked to Louise about the basic structure of the festival and the first kind of impetus to have some kind of folk music there, and here's what she had to say about that in my interview a few days ago with her. Louise, the kind of the strictures or the basic elements of the festival in terms of who comes, who performs, who's a member of the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival organization. Kind of maybe you could talk a little about that background, and and you mentioned at the beginning 1979 4 groups. Now of course there's much more. Maybe you can talk about how it's developed and evolved over time.
Of course. Well, since the initial 4 groups, we've actually gone up to as many as 14 groups. Present day, we are back down to 11 groups because through dancers aging out of programs, certain groups have collapsed, or financially they couldn't make a go of it, so they've collapsed. But in order to be a member of the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival Society as a whole, you have to make an application. As I'm stumbling here.
That's okay.
Okay, so you have to make an application to the executive, expressing an interest to join. You have to be from one of the 4 Western provinces. You will be invited to one of the administrator meetings during a festival weekend, where you will present your case to all of the administrators. And one of the big things is that you have to, 1, prove that you're financially able to carry on as a dance group, and 2, show that you have support of your Hungarian and extensive communities in order to keep the group alive and moving forward. At that point, you're voted in. We've never not voted a group in, but there's always that caveat in there that if you can't prove to the administrators of all the groups that you are a viable group, that there is a possibility they would reject your application. But like I said, we've never had a group that has not been able to show that they have a sound background, they have financial stability, and they have the backing of their community in order to go forward.
Why is
any group?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, any group that is voted in has to wait until the following festival to be able to actually perform, because they're too new. They haven't actually gone through a year's cycle, so they wouldn't actually perform on stage until the following year.
Why is it important that, and this is an Easterner talking here, so forgive me for the question, but why is it important that that the membership be of from the four Western provinces?
Well, that was initially decided for two reasons. One, it was because the East had their own Pontazo, so we wanted something for the West. And two, it was a financial concern because for a group of, at that time, upwards of possibly 30 dancers to fly from, say, Vancouver all the way to, say, Toronto for a weekend for, say, 10 minutes of performance time and some tanchas and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It just wasn't financially responsible for them to think about it. We have revisited the thoughts of bringing other groups in from the other provinces, but again, it's come down to that financial situation. It's just not financially sound to do that.
There's also this this custom of the festival being hosted by various. So the host city changes every year, correct?
Correct. It does. Yes.
The burden of putting on a festival must be quite extensive. How do groups deal with that financial and logistical burden?
Well, I can't speak for other groups, but I can tell you with our group, we're constantly doing fundraisers, whether it's making and selling kolbas, going to fairs and selling langos, hosting dinners at our Magyar Ház. We are constantly doing fundraising, and it serves to put money in our bank to host future festivals and to keep the dance group alive. Not only that, but we have been luckily, we did get a gaming license years back, so we did get money from our provincial gaming commission. And that was a big help, but of course there are strict guidelines that they rule saying how that money can be spent, and so we could never touch that money for travel to another province. Any money that was given to our group by the Gaming Commission had to be used within our province or for things like costuming, bringing instructors, musicians in from other countries that really, really regimented what you could use the money for. We have also applied for grants, and those are a lot more flexible how you can spend the money, but we've been lucky to get grants from the Hungarian government. We've got a grant from the Csori Sándor form, and grants, fundraising, gaming commissions, that's where we always got our money. And to put on a festival like that, you're looking at $60,000 plus.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah, it's very, very expensive to do something
and that
like
just,
that.
That's just the cost to fly me there to play the violin.
Yes, you are very, very high maintenance.
Hey, speaking of that, when was the first time that you know that a live band came to the festival?
A live folk band?
Yeah.
All the way from Hungary?
Yes.
The very first live folk band that played at a festival was in 1992 in Victoria. We had booked one particular band who had to pull out at the last minute for some reason, and we were very lucky that Malev Kamaras agreed to come and play at our festival. Now, they only played for the Victoria Dance Group, and they played at our banquet, but that was the first time we actually had a live band.
Did they play at Tanchaz?
There was no such thing as Tanchaz back in those days. The banquet took place instead of the Tanchaz. It was all about the banquet. Because at that time, it was still being run by what I would like to classify as the older generation, even though I'm part of that now.
Right.
And they liked to, like I said, they remember things from 1956, and it's all about your balls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, You're not your balls, but your debutante balls. Yeah,
like that kind of ball. Ball,
yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Yes. So Malev Kamaras will go down in history as the first band to play at the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival, which is interesting because that's a group that, first of all, no longer exists, but was really never known as a Tanchaz group. It was actually, and the fact that they're called Malev Kamaras. They played a lot of very contemporary type of folklore-based arrangements, kind of modernized it, and but they were sponsored by Malev, so the Hungarian the Hungarian National Hungarian Airlines, right? So they were able to fly, I think, at a very discounted or even free rate. What do you know about that aspect? I'm pretty sure that Malev did sponsor their flights, but once they landed here, it was all under our monetary responsibility. And actually, they stayed at my house, and whoa, those guys can drink. Did you tell them, what do you think you're in first class here? Come on, lighten up on the booze here.
Well, there was one member who didn't drink. He was diabetic, so he couldn't drink, but the others definitely made up for it. I have a liquor cupboard that was, it was full to busting. And they were here for 2 days before festival, and by the time festival arrived, that cupboard was empty. And I don't drink.
There you have it, the big boozers, Malev Kamaras. Yeah, so, Malev Kamaras is indeed, as I mentioned to Louise on the phone there, is really not that known for the folk music, but more these arrangements. I wanted to play you an arrangement from Malev Kamaras to take you back to the first festival where there was live music. That's 1992. And of course, after that, there was a few years of no live folk music before 1995 started. But this is Malev Kamaras, an arrangement called Üzenet, Message. And let's listen to that. It's a little contemporary, but it'll give you a nice flavor of what Malev Kamaras was. We have to acknowledge that that's the first band that performed at the first folk band that performed at a Western Canadian Hungarian folk festival. Here's Malev Kamaras with Üzenet. Nice arrangement. A little ütőgardon at the beginning. Sounds like in a jungle, the mighty jungle. In the jungle, the mighty jungle. No? Picture them boozing it up at the Kadar house in Victoria. It's a nice arrangement. This was a very well accepted style. It still is, of course. And I think it's appropriate that they played at the time when the banquets were important, because I'm sure the older generation kind of appreciated this style of music as well. And I know they also played straight up folk music back in '92, but this was what Malev Kamaras was known for. get that Gordon in the background playing the kettős rhythm. Dum, 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 dum. Of course, the Gordon is tuned in the key of D. All the instruments in D. The percussive cello. That's Ütő Gordon. And good thing the song is in D, otherwise it would sound really weird. Jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. And I really wanted to contrast Malev Kamaras, that was the first band, with the most recent band that has been to the festival, and that was Heveder band. Last year they were at the festival. I just want to make sure that that's correct information. Let me see here. Yeah, Heveder in 2019, and I have a nice recording that they did. Of course, Heveder, you know, band from Transylvania. I interviewed on Tanchaz Talk interviews a couple of weeks ago Fazakas Levente, the lead violinist, in English. Of course, all my interviews are in English, and I highly recommend that one. He talks about some really great things about the violin and about himself and about living in Transylvania, and it's just a really great interview. We did a really great job. Anyway, they play a really mean örköi, of course, gypsy music from Transylvania, and this is a recording of them playing örköi live outdoors, actually. So it's not a technically perfect recording, but it really gets a nice vibe from Heveder, and I think you'll all know this big hit, Örköi Cigány Muzsika, from Heveder.
Jaj, 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 de nagy baj, elhullottad fejéről a nőhaj. Jaj, 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 de nagy baj, mert elhullottad fejéről a hosszú. Vegye kejfe Gyuri, ne aludjál, mert azt hiszik, hogy meghaltál. Kejfe Gyuri, ne aludjál, mert azt hiszik, hogy meghaltál. Jaj, 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 de nagy baj, mert elhullottál a fejéről a hosszú hajnalambok. Jaj, 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 de nagy baj, mert elhullottál a fejéről a göndör. Gyertek ide, sógorom, itt a jobb oldalon. Adjatok, de igyatok, jajjaj, de igyatok, ki világos reggeli mulassan. De igyatok, jajjaj, de igyatok, ki világos reggeli mulassan. De falu még él egy kicsi pár, ott lakik a gyúr. jaj, de szalonnák, azt ígérte pofonnák, de pofonnák. Egyre kell fegyülni a padláson. Vágszalonnát, tedd a zsákon. Vágjad a trád, csuhaj több fér belé, csak az árát ne vágj belé. Vágjad a trád, csuhaj több fér belé, csak az árát ne vágj belé. Odakinn a nagy hegy alatt sejtelina, 3 legény zabotarat sejtelina, szabotarat, fekete lovának szeretőt keres magát. Szabotarat, fekete lovának szeretőt keres magát. Gyere, ne menj arra sejtelina, jobb utal már, mint arra sejtelina. Gyere, nem arra, Ajaj, Gyuri bár, meggondoltuk a világ, Ajaj, Gyuri bár, meggondoltuk a világ,
We've come a long way since Malev Kamaras in terms of the style of music presented at the festival, and of course this is the great Heveder, and we'll talk about some of the other great bands in a few minutes. But for now, I wanted to show some recording of some my other interview that I did with Jim Cockell, Kokos Imre. Jimmy Cockell is his mom's parents came from Hungary, so he's half Hungarian. They came from Hungary in the 1930s. His mom grew up speaking some Hungarian, but his dad's side is completely English. So Jim did not grow up in a traditional, typical Hungarian-Canadian household. He started playing violin as a young child in his hometown of Edmonton, which is where he is still living. He came onto the scene through onto the Hungarian folk music scene through his band Cifra, which was formed in 1994. As a precursor to that, he was playing for a couple of years with his friend Moni Matthew, who of course is still a member of Cifra. But in 1994 is when they formed their band, and that was Jim's first festival. That was his first camp as well in 1994, his first Hungarian folk music camp. So that's really when he got into the scene and really fell in love with this music. He will be a subject of a future, not too far distant interview that I'll be doing on Tanchaz Talk with Jim, because Jim has some great stories and great background and great experiences with Hungarian folk music scene, and of course the Tanchaz as well. And he's a very important figure in the Western Canadian music scene. And I talked to Jim about the shift to live music as part of the festival, and here's some of our discussion. Jim, as one of the key musicians in the Western Canadian Hungarian community, I know your first festival was somewhere in the mid-90s. Why don't you talk about your initial experience with your Cifra band and your first kind of glimpse at this Western Canadian Hungarian folk festival?
Sure. So my first festival was in 1994, and it was in Kelowna. And that sticks out particularly because, as far as I know, the festival hasn't been back there, which is too bad because it's a beautiful place, and I'm sure we'd love to go back. And I know that there are people there who are hopefully maybe have something cooking for dance groups. But anyhow, yeah, that was my first festival. And the Cifra group had actually come together just a few months prior that year. And the crucible for the whole group was actually an international group that I'd been playing for a few years prior to that, I think since about 1990. And that's where I started working with Moni Matthew, who still plays Bracha for our group. And that's also where I met Sue Biro and Tundavari, who were also dancing for the Chardash group in Edmonton. And they didn't precisely invite us to jump ship, but that's sort of what we ended up doing. At least I did, and we wound up playing for the Czardas group in 1994 at the festival.
So you could have been the first domestic, well, maybe even because we know Malev Kamaras was there in 1992, but not sure they played for any. I think they only played for the Victoria group. So you might be the first domestic Canadian-based band to play live music for one of the groups performing at the festival, huh?
To the best of my knowledge, yes, but I may stand corrected if somebody knows differently. But yeah, to the best of my knowledge. Right.
So there were a couple of bands that came as well, and I wanted to kind of note Teka, because I know the Teka band is close to your heart. At that time, the lead violinist was Vizeli Balázs, who I think would be classified as one of your great mentors. Talk about Teka at this festival and some of the experiences that you had then.
Sure. So we met those guys. I first met them in '94. Again, just really a couple of months prior to that first festival. And they were the guest instructors at the TT Tabor camp in Seattle. So that's where I met them, and then we sort of built that relationship over the next few years to the point where in 1997 they came out for their first Canadian tour, which was organized by Sue. And I think together with Lajos in Vancouver, Lajos Miklos,
yeah.
and then they came out for the festival in 1998.
Gotcha. And were they playing choreographies at that point for some of the groups at least?
To the best of my recollection, yes. I know that we would have played certainly for the Czardas group. And I'm kind of drawing a blank as to who else they might have played for, but I'm sure we've got video evidence somewhere about those performances. But yeah, it's memory fades over the decades.
Well, what I wanted to ask you, Jim, about is that this whole kind of pivot from a banquet disco culture. With the performance always there for the groups, to what has now become a real Tanchaz culture to this festival. And my understanding from talking to Louise is that 2000 is kind of the pivotal year when Duve started to come out and started to play music for every group. I know you were there as well because you've been to most every festival. And then the disco kind of and the ball has kind of gone by the wayside as the 56er generation has kind of stepped out of the festival organization, and we have a more Tanchaz spirit here. Maybe you can talk about how you've seen that change into the Tanchaz culture.
Yeah, it's hard to pick out sort of an inflection point where everything really, really changed. But I know, for instance, in '99, when we played, I think we were the only band there for '99, and I know that there was still a banquet that year. And but I think there was already quite a lot of pressure from the leadership of the dance groups that we need to do something more cultural, and certainly there was enough interest by that point to have a social event that was something more cultural as opposed to just a disco or a party. And the banquet as well, I think, was I don't know exactly when the last banquet was, but it's hard to pin it to a particular year. But I think things were already in motion in the years prior to that. I think there was already pressure building. So it was more, in my mind, it was more of a gradual shift.
Mm-hmm. Certainly when we all regrouped there in 2004 in Vancouver, I remember at that point there was certainly no banquet at that time. And I remember meeting you. I guess we would have met in '95 at the festival in Calgary, and that's an interesting kind of visual, Jim, isn't it? You know, you remember that curling rink, and on the left side was the banquet on Saturday night. On the right side was the Tanchaz on Saturday night. And it was, you know, it must have been, it's kind of a visual thing. You take a satellite image of the, you know, of here's the kind of where the festival was, and here's kind of where it's going to the right.
I have a very specific memory of, I don't know if it was the very first time that we met or played together, but we were in the middle of that. At that point, that was the Calgary Hungarian Hall.
Yes.
It was a renovated curling rink, and there we were in the middle of it, you know, and in all likelihood, what had been the house or something, and there we were playing Make It Icky. I remember that.
That's nice memory, Jim. Unfortunately, I don't remember that, but that's great. So those are some words from Jim Cockell, and he mentioned Make It Icky, and I wanted to play some music from not far from there, very similar music to Make It Icky, which is music from Elek. Make It Icky and Elek are two very notable, primarily Romanian populated towns within Hungary, towards the border of Romania and Hungary, but they're still in Hungary, these towns. And I did an episode a couple of episodes ago called So Close Yet So Far, where I talk about the music of Make It Icky. But anyway, I wanted to play the music from the Cifra band, played by Jim Cockell and Moni Matthew, and this is from their old CD called Három éjjel, három nap, and this is Romanian music from Elek. Of course, this is a great time to mention some of the other bands from North America that have been at the festival, aside from Cifra. Eletfa, that's my old band, the first Tanchaz band really in North America, Tanchaz dedicated band. We went up there with Papatila and Zagyvanati and myself in 1995. We went up to Calgary. And of course, we have the Rokka band, otherwise known as the Savanya, István and Esther band. They've been to the festival multiple times with their amazing music on some of the more unique instruments that they feature. They're from Calgary. Of course, we have to mention the fantastic band from Vancouver and Seattle. That's the Forrás band, and as I mentioned before, I've interviewed Lajos Miklós before. He's a big name in that community there, and they've been to the festival multiple times, and we've played together as well. They're Forrás band. Yeah, someone's dancing on this. Sure, it's not Jim. nice. That's music from Elek. And I want to stay with the music theme here and play some music from Solonna. Solonna's band. They were here as Solonna és Bondája in 2010 at a festival, and fantastic band, of course. Of course, Solonna himself was at a prior festival as well with the Golga band, featuring himself and Unger Balázs on cimbalom and others. That was in 2003, but Solonna in 2010. By the way, in 2010 also the Kozma Trio was another band that was at the festival. Let's listen in to Solonna és Bondája with this amazing track from their CD Örömzene. This is called Tibi Géza emlékének Kolozsvár. Getting fast, guys. Fasten your seatbelts. Nice. Solonna's band. I find it really striking the quality of bands that have come out through the years, and we've talked about lots of them, and it's just great for the dancers to be able to perform with such wonderful live music, and not just bands from Hungary and Transylvania, but also the bands from North America as well. And I talked to Jim Cockell a bit about that as well, and his own experiences collaborating with these musicians. And here's what he had to say. Jim, in terms of here you are, you're, daily musician in terms of the Western Canadian, Hungarian, Tanchazes and all that, playing in Edmonton and beyond. And obviously it's great to have these bands come from Hungary every Thanksgiving weekend. You get to jam together and you get to play together. Tell me some of the more memorable experiences you've had over the years with these various musicians that have come out.
So I think 1998 stands out for me just because that was our festival in Edmonton, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
and we invited the Takeout guys out because we had that pretty strong connection with them. And also the band from Gyula Tánccsoport came out, along with Yellow Glaslow, who was the instructor there. And there was a long-standing connection with those guys going back, long before my time. But they had Yellow Glaslow had instructed the group many times and done many of the choreographies. So it was a big deal that those guys came out. I think a number of the dancers came out too. So it was like a big. It's probably the most guests we've ever had at once from Hungary for a festival, because it was quite a number of the dancers and the band and the instructor all came out from Gyula at the same time as Takeoff.
Okay, cool. So, at this point now we have like 2 times or 3 times whatever Tanchaz is going on, right? Almost every night. That's a lot of music, and it's all done by one band pretty much from Hungary. And I know I'm going to ask you about Duvő, because I know Duvő has been a big influence on you personally and on the Western Canadian Hungarian folk scene. Why don't you talk to me a little bit about the energy and and what you think Duvő brings to the whole scene out there?
Yeah, well, and I guess here's where we have to enlarge the discussion a little bit from festival, because, of course, these relationships go beyond that weekend. These are guys that we met in camps, or we met when we were touring in Hungary or whatnot. We have, there's a lot more to it than just the festival weekend. But in particular with Duvő and I maybe with Takeout before them, I don't recall, but there would always be a tour leading up to festival.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be a chance for the band to connect with, the various dance groups around the country. And I think if Duvő wasn't the first band to do that, I think that was certainly where it became a thing. We would have a tour before a festival. The band would come out. They would travel around the various cities. They would play a concert, and they would also practice with the dancers, and at the same time kind of build that connection.
Right.
And so certainly the first few festivals that they came out to do that, there was this really powerful kind of ethos, in the
yeah.
in the performances and in the dance, and the dances is like, these are our guys. We know these guys. I'll tell you the one festival that really sticks out for me, sort of early in those days, was 2001,
mm-hmm.
Which I believe was Victoria.
Okay.
Yeah, and it might have been 2000 now that I think about it. I'm not sure. But I just remember it was in Victoria, and Iggy Kadar, who with Louise is the leader of the dance group there, Iggy put together this incredible finale of a korcsos, Palatkai korcsos.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the Duvő guys and us and all of the, not all of them, but many of the male dancers from the groups getting out and doing this incredible choreography. And that all came about because, of course, the band had been touring for 2 months between TT and the festival. And they had a chance to go and, rehearse with every dance group in the country prior to that.
Right.
Sorry.
She's saying
that's
hello.
My little one in the background there. That's another festival product, incidentally, which I'll get to momentarily. I mentioned that one in particular because that was the sort of choreography, that was the sort of performance that came about as a result of the band being in the country for a while before the festival and kind of getting it together with all of these different groups.
Right. We can't let the young vocalists get in our way, Jim. Tell us about the what the festival has meant to you personally in your life and in terms of your family.
Well, and for that, I think I need to fast forward to 2014, which I have to sort of mark in red as the probably the most important festival for me personally, because that's where I met my wife. And that was, if you recall, that was in Regina.
Yeah.
And you had put together a concert, and we, as I recall, we worked our asses off on stage for 2 hours there. It was a pretty good concert. I felt pretty good about that afterwards. And I went, there was a Tanchaz afterwards. I walked down onto the floor, spotted this woman and started talking her up, figuring that, I just put on a big show on stage. So, my stock had to be up at that point. And there I am talking her up for a while. And only later did I realize she had no clue who I was. I had just been playing my ass off on stage for 2 hours, and she had no clue who I was. So it was pretty much like courtship from scratch, but somehow it still all worked out in the end.
Unbelievable. Well, yeah, I mean, our personal collaboration, Jim, and obviously, I guess it goes back to 95, playing Mékeréki, as you've kindly reminded me. But there's a what I would say a very interesting pivotal festival in 2012. I got a call from Andy Madoy earlier that year telling me that the festival conditions in terms of the financial possibilities were very limited. And the Vancouver Fordash Dance Group has stepped in to save the festival, so to speak, and to host that year's festival. But they could not do it by bringing any band from Hungary because it was cost prohibitive. So we had agreed in terms of Gyanta and together with Szász Józsi and with you to play that festival. And I think some of your bandmates came as well, and I know some Fordash guys came as well. And we made it happen without any help from any band from Hungary, which seemed to have been consistent from the year 2000 onwards until 2012. I've had some wonderful memories from that time, Jim, playing together, and maybe you can share some of your memories as well. Obviously, this 2014, the big show in Regina, where you met your wife to be. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of special to play together and to make it a kind of a homegrown deal. That must have been a kind of big deal to play every choreography, every dance for every dance group there.
I just what I remember about that festival in 2012, I remember the call from Andy. And I remember it was, I think, all of maybe 2 or 3 days prior to Downbeat. I mean, it was literally last minute. So it was me just hopping on a flight, getting picked up, and heading out to this, I believe, what was a casino in Richmond. Yeah, and that's where we wound up doing the whole festival. So, I mean, that was all very last minute for me. And I just remember, I mean, it was a spectacular last minute collaboration where I don't even know if I knew anything I certainly didn't have any prior knowledge about what was being played. I think it was just all kind of getting it together at the last minute, and somehow it worked out.
Yeah. Well, you're a great lead violinist and a second violinist as well, and of course, and we played a very cool concert in Lethbridge together as well with the Savanya, István and Eszter, and with Gyanta and Jocó. I think that might have been the next year, but there was a theater concert. You remember that one? That was great too.
I do, yes. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. So that's a bit of my conversation with Jim Cockell about some of his memories with the live music, and of course he mentions Gyanta, which we'll hear some of our music at the tail end of the show. And I mentioned that in that interview, and I might have misspoke. I made it sound like it was earlier in the year that we got that call from Andy Madoy. It was probably weeks before the festival, actually. That's why it was very last minute, as Jim said. But of course, my memory fades over time. But I do recall that's how we first stepped in terms of that festival. Well, no festival can be no Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival program can go by without mentioning and playing some music from what I would classify as the Hungarian house band, the house band from Hungary, to the festival, which of course is Düvő. Here they are. Düvő has been to the festival. I have a list here from Louise. 2000, 2001, 2004 through 2009, 2011, and 2018. Düvő's been here many times. They're a big part of the community, and these guys always rock it.
De mikor megy a legény, szólhat este jafa. Utána az angyal, édes fiam, gyere, nem megyek én, anyám, mert elhagyott azért rózsa. Keresek másikát, aki igazabb lesz hozzá. Nem megyek én, anyám, mert elhagyott azért rózsa. Keresek másikát, aki igazabb lesz hozzá. Nem messze van ide babam tanyája, ide látszik virágos álmafája. Álmafája körül folyja a teljes szekő, nem taposom több szombat este kő. Álmafája körül folyja a teljes szekő, nem taposom több szombat este kő. Székelyföldről szokott harmat leszállni, ha rendszer ez nem muszáj hozzám járni. Kikísérlek, nyitva hagyom sarkig az ajtót, várom a régi szeretőmet. Kikísérlek, nyitva hagyom sarkig az ajtót, várom a régi szeretőmet.
Of course, Düvő has various iterations and various generations of musicians, but the constant are the Hrúz brothers, or the Hrúz sisters, as I sometimes call them, Hrúz Dénes and Szabolcs, two fantastic musicians that the core and the heart of Düvő throughout all the years they have been at the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival.
Minden lánynak ott van a baján, csak az enyém hervad a kaszárnyában. Minden lánynak ott van a baján, csak az enyém hervad a kaszárnyában. A csizmának se sárka, se tárba, minden kopott a tegnapi táncba. Majd lesz annak sárka is, darba is lesz, szeretőm szőke is, barna is. Majd lesz annak sárka is, darba is lesz, szeretőm szőke is, barna is. Ez a kislány, barna kislány, ha bemegy a
I love that line there. The violin goes up and the bass goes down. That's a wonderful counterpoint here. Here we go. Very witty ending from Duve. I talked to Louise about the importance of live music at the festival and some about the future of the festival as well. This is my last clip of my discussion a few days ago with Kadar Louise from Victoria. I remember 1995. It felt like an airplane hangar, but I'm now told that it might have been a curling rink. But I mean, we talk about the banquets. When you walked into the big, I guess it was a Hungarian club or whatever it was at the time, I don't know. But to the left side, the banquet was going on. And then on the right side, the Tanchaz with Eletfa from New Jersey. I was playing there, and with I know Savanya, István, and Esther were there, and Cifra from Edmonton were there as well. That was a Tanchaz going on. That seems to be the first real kind of dedicated Tanchaz at the festival, starting in 1995. Do you remember that event, Louise?
No, I actually do remember that event. It was very interesting because we were dancing on concrete.
Yeah, sounds right. Sounds right.
Yes, it was very interesting, and you're right. It does seem to be the first really organized Tanchaz. There have been pseudo Tanchaz in years prior to that, but that was the first really organized Tanchaz that the festival held.
The best I can tell, since then, every year there was a band, either from Hungary or Cifra from Edmonton, or Forrás from Vancouver, and of course Gyanta, our band at the festival. But it seems to me that around 2000 is the first year Duve started coming, and of course Duve is very, very closely intertwined with the Western Canadian Hungarian folklore community. Is a fantastic band, and I believe that was the first year in 2000 that without question all choreographies danced by every dance group was played by Duve. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and the history. Maybe I'm sure you got some resistance at the time. Maybe you can talk about that.
Definitely. Duve actually came onto our radar because they were really making a name for themselves playing at Western Hungarian folk dance camp called Titi Tabor. Mm-hmm. And this is where my husband Iggy and myself came to know them. And they had heard about our festival, and it was in Hungary. It was a bit of a buzzword back there, and they were saying, "Why don't you have live bands playing your music?" Because they'd heard about the recorded music that was being used. And we said, well, choreographies can be very difficult. And they came back and said, we can play anything. Yeah. And so through discussions with them, we engaged them to come out to the 2000 festival in Victoria and let all the dance groups know that they had to submit their choreography music to us so that Duve could learn it prior to the performances. Most of the groups were right on board with that. They loved the idea. There were a few groups that were very concerned that there's no way that one group of musicians would be able to learn all those pieces of choreography music. And they had asked if they could bring a little boombox and play their choreography music through a boombox. But our organizing committee stood fast and said, no, you must send us your music, and believe me, Duve will play it. And that year, Duva played absolutely everyone's choreography perfectly. They didn't miss a single note.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it important? And you were part of that, committee or the organizer group, and you have been in the years since then. Why is it so important to have live music for the dancers performing at the festival?
Oh, it's an entirely different feeling when you're performing for live musicians. You can interact not only with the audience, but with the musicians themselves. It just brings so much more energy into the dance, and also it's much more enjoyable for the audience. Much more enjoyable.
Yeah. How about the whole fact that now, of course, flash forward to 2020, I guess we should 2019, the latest non-pandemic year. Seems like ages ago, but there's no more banquet, and now there's Tanchaz on Friday night, which is the opening night of the festival. Tanchaz on Saturday, Tanchaz on Sunday. Obviously, without a live band or live bands, this would be impossible. This whole the whole Tanchaz aspect of the festival. From the very first days of the two gentlemen from Vancouver and from Edmonton agreeing to host a 4-group festival in 1979, all the way to today, where it's almost give or take a dozen groups, and there's Tanchazes, 3 Tanchazes, and there are workshops, and of course there are gala performances. What would you say in terms of the success of the WCHFF and the potential future as you see it of the organization?
Well, the organization just continues to grow. It's known right across Canada and the United States, as well as back in Hungary. Very, very healthy in that we've got groups, as my group, that have been involved in it for 40 years. Other groups that have come in, I think our most recent group joined perhaps 10 years ago, but they're still going strong. We are doing our damnedest to start a scholarship fund as a whole, the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival Society. We're starting a scholarship program that we're trying to get money so that dancers, musicians, costumers who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it can apply and get a grant to go back to Hungary to study with the masters. So this is something that's very important to us right now. This is the biggest push that the executive have got going right now, is our scholarship program. We're there to support all the groups, but we're also trying to make it so that people with financial difficulties are still able to go back to Hungary and study.
On behalf of everybody here in the East, and of course in Canada and the US and everywhere else, we've come a long way, baby, as they say, and I wanted to thank you and all the organizers, and of course your husband Iggy as well, and Victoria Buzavira group has been around for longest time in terms of all the dancing, but if you could have the last word in terms of saying something in reflection of this pandemic year and the difficulties that obviously the cancellation has caused upon the festival, I'll give you the last word, Louise.
Well, it was actually the host group that was supposed to take the festival this year that canceled it, but it was with the approval of the executive, of which I'm on. It just was not worth risking bringing that many people together in an area when the virus is still so virulent.
Yeah.
And so canceling it was really the only decision. But the moment that it was canceled, that's when the plans started immediately to try and bring this virtual festival online so that we wouldn't actually miss a year, because if you miss 1 year, then you might miss 2. If you miss 2 years, then you might as well call it quits. So we did not want to lose momentum. So this is why the executive, with the help of a few people, have been working very hard to put together this virtual festival that's coming up on the Thanksgiving weekend.
Great, and our show's a part of that as well. Louise, thank you so much for all your work and all your efforts, and continued success on the festival, and all Victoria Buzavirag and all the other projects you guys are working on.
Yes, and I'd like to send a thank you out to our executive members, which is Amalia Siladi, Royce Beret. I always get his last name. Beretti,
yeah.
Beretti, he calls himself, and Biro Juji. And we've also got another person that's been helping us an awful lot, and that's Andrea Siladi and her husband Jordi. They've been helping us with the digital conversion and getting things online for the presentations.
Awesome, thank you. Well, there you have it. Some more words from Louise Kadar, talking about some about the past, but also about the future, and some acknowledgments as well. And let's turn back to some more music. This band, Zodva. They've been at the festival more recently, 2015, 2016, and 2017. These guys play prolifically all around Hungary. Fantastic band. I would call them the younger generation, but they really do a great job playing the shows and playing the Tanchazes. And they've also been to Csipke Tábor, and they're obviously very well known in Hungary. This is Zodva. This is Nádasmenti music from their CD Játék Határok Nélkül, and this is recorded live. Actually, you could hear Kadar Ignác in the background as well, one of the dancers who have been to the festival many times. Not to be confused with Kadar Igi. This is a Nazi, Kadar Ignác. Dancing. You might remember also another musician that came from Hungary, Kurdi Gábor. In 2016, he played the bagpipe, the duda. You remember that? Kurdi Gábor came along with Zodva in one of those years in 2016. Another mention of another great musician that's been at the festival from Hungary. A vastag húros jaj. one of those melodies that has two beginnings, the same beginning, two second parts, two different second parts. There's this minor part and a major part as well. It's up to the band, of course, which one they play. Pizzicato. That's piped in crowd noise. No, just kidding. That's recorded live. That CD from Zodvo, a great band at the festival in the 2000 teens, as they say. I wanted to also play my last little clip of my conversation with Jim, and he talks about how some of the material has changed over time through the years in terms of what's being played and performed, and he also gives a nice little sign-off at the end. So here's the final part of my discussion with Jim Cockell from Edmonton. Jim, how has the material in terms of what you see performed and what you guys play over the years evolved since the 90s that you've been participating in the Western Festival?
I think I have to dive right back to the very beginning for us, back in 94 and those first few years, kind of through the mid to late 90s, where there was, I think there was a received culture that was pretty rooted in kind of the 50s and 60s, kind of that generation of folk dance performance, kind of what was expected, and especially in terms of, the model that was set forth by the Alami at that time, and various Hungarian national performing groups. So against that backdrop, I guess we were involved in some kind of, I don't want to say cutting edge, but maybe slightly controversial performing decisions. And the first of which, and the most sort of prominent of which sticks in memory, is Mékeréki, because we had this connection with László Gyalog from Mékerék, and Mékerék was his backyard, and he was one of the the important ethno-choreologists in that village. And so for that reason alone, we wound up performing at that festival, and that was in those early years, which again, I don't recall just what the response was, but certainly we were expecting a lot of pushback from sort of the dance group administrations and the powers that be. But I just recall with that performance and the response from the audience, I mean, that was the first kind of huge audience reaction that I remember from festival, doing that number, because it was just so different, and it made an impression for that reason. So I remember the sort of climate at that point being rather tense regarding material like that. Right. Well,
for some of the people that are used to the Nota tradition, Kalota Segi is Romanian to them, So I'm sure, throwing Mékerék, which is actually Romanian, or anything like that, would be quite a shock.
Can I just throw something in
Sure.
here, because I remember emailing back and forth with you shortly after we met, because we were talking, amongst other things, about Magyar Nota, because I was doing some research at the university at that time. Yeah. And you wrote to me, you actually used a term which I always associate with you, because you said it was a hard-headed Hungarian, Triple H.
Yeah.
And so the somebody of that generation who hears say Kolotasegi and says, "What is this Romanian stuff that you're doing?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've covered some of that in prior episodes on this program, and some painful lessons there, and some hard-headed Hungarians to get through. But ultimately, everything works out. Jim, I wanted to know. Obviously, this the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival has been canceled for this year and put as a virtual festival, as many other events have been done. You are a professional musician. You make your living playing music, and not just folk music, obviously, but classical music is the big one for you. How has this impacted you, your family, and your colleagues? It must be something else.
For me personally, I've been fairly lucky because I'm fairly diversified. So, I mean, in addition to music work, I've got, academic work that I do. I've got some other, sources of income to draw on during these times. But, I mean, my heart goes out particularly to a lot of the theater types that I know, actors and actresses, because that is another big part of my career is doing theater music and theater work. And these are people without any job security whatsoever. And the fact that, they're also some of the most talented people that I've ever worked with. And the fact that they're out now looking for work bussing dishes or whatever is just, that to me is particularly heartbreaking. So, I mean, for me personally, it's been a hit, but I think there are many other people who I know who are much more affected. And I think that's sort of the most affecting thing about the current situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope you hang in there, and I'm going to have you back for a long form discussion, because probably in November or December later this year for the Tanchaz Talk interviews, because we've only skimmed the surface, and I want to hear about all the other brilliant things I said to you other than the hard-headed Hungarians. So maybe you could remind me of the old things.
Just, Öcsi, thank you so much for this opportunity. And just before we sign off, can I say I just want to send out, a massive hug and kiss to everybody out there, all of our friends out there in the various cities in Western Canada who we are really missing seeing this year. And what can I say? We can't wait for the next time that we're actually able to physically assemble and make up for all this lost time.
Indeed. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Well, lovely words from Jim Cockell. And before we wrap up the show with some music from Gyanta and Jim and Sasioji, I wanted to send a greeting from the East. And I was speaking with Jeszika Paulusz from Montreal, who grew up dancing with the Bokleta dance group in Montreal, and of course is a member of the Gyanta band, one of the vocalists in Gyanta. And I asked her to put together a quick greeting to the East, or from the East to the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival friends. We had a conversation as well a couple of days ago, and this is what she had said, and let's play some of my quick discussion here with Jeszika Paulusz from Montreal. Hey Jess, I know you've been going to the festivals for I guess over a decade, almost every year with Gyanta. Tell me about some of your experiences and why you enjoy the going out west so much from Montreal.
Hi, Öcsi. You know what? It's so weird that you're saying decade, because I think it's crazy that I've been going for over 10 years. Why I enjoy going out west is just, I don't know, the festival for me is just so incredible because they concentrate on so many things, but especially seeing these groups perform on stage and having these amazing costumes and choreographies. Every single year is just incredible. Having these people who you connect with because of through passion of Hungarian dancing, and you see the same people you wake up, you go to breakfast with, because we are all stuck in a hotel, this amazing hotel every year, it's that's why it varies from, I guess, Pontosor, where we go here in the east, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like we're like a sequestered jury, you know. And
it's amazing.
Yeah, and we're all there. It's like a camp. It's like a weekend camp, and bringing the bands and bringing the dance teachers and everything. You know what's interesting to me, Jess, is the fact that the festival is in October, middle or beginning of October every year, and these groups are ready to go, and it makes me feel like they take the summer off and actually they don't take the summer off and they practice in the summertime. It's pretty interesting, right?
Exactly, I was going to say, because for us here, we go to Chipket after we get a break till September, maybe, right? Well, maybe we'll go to Hungary or Romania. But for them, it's like, okay, let's go during the summer to have these crazy performances, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, obviously this year's festival is virtual, and it's, you know, I'm wondering if you have a greeting from the East to our friends at the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival.
Of course, here at the East, we love you guys. We encourage you. We encourage you guys on behalf of me, Bukrita, I'm sure Kadar, every group here in the East. We are sending you guys all the amazing positive vibes, and hopefully, who knows when, but we will get together in the future.
Absolutely. You know, just you remember 2012 in Lethbridge, we played a great the big Satmari with multiple groups were performing, and I think that was that Lethbridge. That might have been Vancouver. I'm confused, but anyway, we played with Sasioji and Jim Cockell, and of course Gyanta, and you guys were singing, and even Kadar Ignatz came onto the stage to sing again.
Yeah.
That was a big highlight, and I'm going to be playing that at the end of the episode here. So
amazing! I can't wait to hear it.
Jess, thanks for your greeting to the West, and I'll make sure they get it through this Tanchaz Talk episode.
Fantastic! Have a great time, guys.
And here is the much-promised Satmari, which will bring back some nice memories from the 34th festival in Lethbridge. And this is the last number for this show. It's a little, feels like a very live recording here. But this is the band Gyanta, our band, which has been at the festival in 2008, 2009, and then every year since 2012. And for a couple of years, of course, it was the house band playing all the choreographies. Of course, together we have Sasioji from Üstürü. He's been to the festival a few times together with Gyanta playing the cimbalom, and Jim Cockell on the violin as well with us. Thank you for listening to this episode of Tanchaz Talk. And just so you know, folks, just as a reminder, aside from the YouTube channel for Tanchaz Talk, just search Tanchaz Talk on YouTube, and through tanchaz.com you can also hear the interview episodes all the long-form podcast interviews episodes on all popular podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, whatever. Subscribe to that and you'll be up to date on all the great interviews that I've been doing and I will continue to keep doing on Tanchaz Talk. I guess I had a lot of coffee that morning. Oh boy. And of course I'd like to thank Louise, Kadar and Jim Cockell as well as Jeszika, Paulusz for contributing to today's Music and Stories show of Tanchaz Talk, which I send with great love to the Western Canadian Hungarian Folk Festival community. See you next time, guys. My name is Kalman Magyar Öcsi from Toronto. Take care.
Én az élet